Thank you for giving us a few minutes of your time.
My pleasure.
So I'm watching TV last year, end of the season, Yankee Stadium, and there is Sharon Robinson, Rachel Robinson, Mariano Rivera. You're out at the monument, and they are retiring his uniform and also acknowledging your dad.
Right. Incredible.
What was that like?
Oh, it was, been many retirement parties, but this was absolutely incredible. It just showed the love that baseball had for the man, because the teams, he got another rocking chair from another team, and his teammates brought him things, but it was throughout all the clubs. They really respected and loved Mariano Rivera. And it was incredible to be there with his family. He's got this, his wife is a minister, and there's a very supportive family. And the Yankees went all out. So it was just an incredible day. Perfect. Couldn't have been a more beautiful day for both families.
Did Mariano reflect at all on the legacy of Brian Trickey? Here he's got the same 42 number, and he was the last to be able to wear that.
He's always talked about how proud he is to have been the last one to wear the number, and he wore it well, and is very proud of the connection to Jackie Robinson. But even more than that, he brought such class and strength to the number, so it enhanced an already powerful number.
And then on the date that happened in 1997 in Shea Stadium.
Yes.
April 15th, and they retired your dad's number. How much advance notice did you get of that? Did you know
that day or the day before? And we didn't know. We got a call saying it was going to happen, and Mom and I looked at each other, was like, "Is this a good idea?" We sort of wanted to see how the fans felt about it, because we'd always liked the fact that there were players that wore number 42. So, but when we got to Shea Stadium, and my mom's out on the field with Commissioner Seelig and President Bill Clinton, and when Commissioner Seelig made the announcement, the fans just jumped out of their seats, and that was like, oh, it was the right decision. So, it was a very, very proud moment. Very historic moment, and we were happy we were at Shea Stadium with the Mets. It was the right place for it to happen, since the Dodgers were not in New York at the time.
As close as you can get. One of my things in my collection is a kind of a piece I put together, which has your dad's signature on. Actually, turns out
You giving this to me?
No.
Oh, thank you. I don't have this. We'll put it in the museum.
And Brian Trickey.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found interesting, and I'll show you the whole card itself, which is high school graduation card, which was kind of, they sent out invitations to come to the high school, and that was...
You're kidding?
Yeah.
This is very cool.
Yeah, I'll show you, and I'll make sure you get copies of all
So what year was this?
Well, when he graduated from high school.
Was it 37 or something?
What? Who graduated from high school?
Your dad.
Wait a minute. This here...
That right behind, under that signature is on it came from, I'll show it to you. This is
My dad graduated from high school.
He was here.
He didn't play for the 1937. John Muir announced his commencement. What? I'm a little confused.
No, it looks like you were inviting him to a high school graduation. We used to do those.
So this is after he graduated.
Yeah.
Yeah. But still, how did they have this?
Oh no, that was added.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you have this. You got this invitation.
Right.
Where'd you get this invitation from?
It came from a family member. Back in 1980s. I was scooping around, and that's where it came from.
Wow, that's what confused me. I thought you were saying it had this picture. I'm going, well, how did they have a picture of him in the Dodger uniform? What visionaries,
Well, what's the? You should think that and I know at one point in 1972, you had a chance, you and your brother David,
Yes.
to really have an interview with your dad.
Right.
What was that like? This is kind of a moment, I think.
It was a moment. It was the whole thing leading up to that. It was the World Series. The year that my father, it was his 25th anniversary of breaking the color barrier, And he told us that we were going to go as a family to, we'd done a number of events over the year, and he told us we were going to go to the World Series in Cincinnati, and he told us, I was a high school student, college student, senior at Howard University. My brother was away at school, my younger brother was away in high school, and he told us that we were going to go to the game, and he said Nixon was coming. And we were like, oh, no, we're not going to get involved with Nixon again. So we were like all political and stuff. And he was like, oh, just trust me on this. We'll go as a family. We're not getting, we're not getting involved with Nixon a second time, second presidency. So we all agree to go and meet in Cincinnati. And I didn't know it was near the end of my dad's life, or very near the end of my dad's life, but I knew he was quite sick. So being at this stadium where they're honoring him for the 25th, and now I'm old enough to take it in, I wanted to know what it was like. And so we did. We were up in our seats in the stands waiting before the ceremony and asking him question after question, and he answered. And it wasn't like my dad was reticent to answer. It was just like we hadn't asked him these questions before. So it was quite a moment. And then it was even more special because my dad chose that moment to not just say thank you and to take his honors, but once again to say, it's great that 25 years later, the field is integrated, but we still don't see any African American, any black people in management. So.
During that kind of interview that you and David had, what was the surprise?
It's a surprise.
So just imagine.
The surprise, I think, was the way he told it back to us, without any, he didn't tell it back in a painful way. And I think my fear all those years, because I'd seen the Jackie Robinson story when I was a young girl, so my fear was that it was such a hurtful thing to him that he would remember it with pain, and I didn't get that from his playback.
Right.
It was, factual. It was happy to share, but not that this was the worst thing that happened to me in life, or this was even though he didn't even go into that it was the most difficult thing he ever had to accomplish, because he really felt that his most difficult challenge was his diabetes. It was something he had no control over, or limited control over.
I think I like the question you asked him, which is in the book 9, where you said, was he lonely?
Yeah.
And his answer?
Yeah, the loneliness comes from being out there by yourself, but it wasn't just on the field. It was, like the traveling and all of that. But again, my dad is so inside of himself, or so he was able to deal with it in ways that probably would have been harder for people that were more social. My dad wasn't all that social anyway. So for him, it was his work, it was his job, he was going to get it done, and he didn't know how long he was going to stay in baseball or how long he'd be in baseball, because he already started off much older than most of the other guys, the guys that were ending their career. He was like just starting at that point. So.
Talk about social. I know he kind of affiliated with the Republican Party.
He was a independent,
Yep.
and he felt that he would judge a person individually and make his decision. And he made some good judgment and some bad judgment. And Nixon was probably his bad judgment. And he recognized it right away, but he'd already made the commitment to him, and he stuck with him during the first campaign and did not stick with him in the second campaign. But he really felt that black people shouldn't be taken for granted, that we should evaluate people based on what they were going to be able to do for us and do for the country.
Martin Luther King. What was your dad's relationship with him? I know that they wanted to reach out to him early on.
Great respect. They were partners initially, and they did some marches together. Then we, as a family, our first big thing was the March on Washington. And then after that, my parents hosted a jazz concert to raise money for Dr. King. actually for his organization and specifically for bail money for the jailed civil rights workers. So they had honorary degrees together. They didn't come to a difference until it came to the Vietnam War. And at that point, it was my father had a son who was in the war, and he was speaking out as a father. Wanted the soldiers to feel that they were there for a reason. And Dr. King, was wanted us come out of the war, which both men were correct. So that was their first sort of, and I think it's unfortunate that they even had to have a public discussion about that. I personally wish they could have talked about it, quietly and just not even had not shared their difference on it. But my father was always very vocal, and as was Dr. King. So.
I read where Monty Irvin said that there was no way that he could have done what your dad did in the late 40s.
Yeah.
Why was your dad able to do that? What about him was able to, after watching 42 several times in the last year,
Right.
I'm blown away each time I've seen it. But why was your dad able to handle all of that stuff? And somebody as respected as Monty and as good as ball player and man as he was, he said, no way.
Well, first of all, ball players always say that, but I don't know. You never know until you're tested how much you can handle anything. So if they had been selected, they probably would have had more strength of character than they even realized they had, as did my father. He had made a commitment right from the beginning with Branch Rickey. That's why Branch Rickey was so clear on how difficult this was going to be. And what he was stepping into. He wasn't just going to be judged as a baseball player. And Branch Rickey, what Branch Rickey liked about my father when he did his research was that this was a man who had done battle against racism and was really a fighter against inequality from when he was a child. And so he sort of followed his own history and where he'd had to stand up and take strong positions and stick with them. In the Army when he was court-martialed basically for insubordination, but he refused to move to the back of the bus in the Deep South with Jim Crow. I mean, all of that shows a certain character in a man and what you're willing to do to change something to right a wrong. And so I think that's really came from strength of character. But I think Monty had strength of character as well. So if he'd been tested, I'm sure he would have stood the challenge.
Jonathan, who wrote the book on your dad.
Yeah. Jonathan Ing.
He indicated that your dad's impact on our society may have been even greater than Rosa Parks. Do you feel that what he did, and how would you respond?
Well, I don't think that you I think that each was a different stage in the process, and it was a process. Rosa Parks came later than my dad, and her efforts moved the movement another step. So my dad was a precursor to the civil rights movement. Then you see all these other. Joe Louis and his battle with Max Smelling was a precursor, but you see all these things led up to 1963, and then this from the sit-ins or whatever. So I don't compare them. They both had a significant impact. Hers was specifically civil rights movement. My dad was overall inequality and racial inequality in this country.
If your dad came back today, having died in 1972, and look around to see progress, how would he reflect, do you think?
My dad and my mom were both people that were optimistic, basically optimistic. My dad felt there was a lot of discouragement towards the end of his life because he wasn't sure what direction things were going. So I think he would see both the positive and the backsliding and the deep racial divide that still exists in this country, and see that as an ongoing struggle. And that both my parents believed that struggle is an ongoing process. It doesn't end. You don't integrate baseball, and now baseball is wonderful and everything's open, and you see now we have to keep pressuring people to keep numbers up and all of that. So it's always an ongoing process. And I think that he would be able to see both the positive and the negative.
About 500 people tomorrow have all read this book, 9.
Okay.
What was the inspiration behind the title and this? Was there a moment, an epiphany saying, I've kind of grabbed my dad and be a part of it?
Yeah, that was the first book I did on my dad. I was very determined as a teenager to have figure out who Sharon was and have my own career, and my dad supported that, and I had all these years as a nurse and as a nurse midwife, a 20-some-odd career, 20-year career, over 20-year career as a nurse and a nurse midwife. So when in 1997, when my son graduated from high school, I approached baseball because it was a 50th anniversary, and I was doing all these throwing out of first pitches and visiting ballparks, and the media kept saying it's just about celebrations, and so that was really what happened with the development of So as I'm talking to baseball about what I would do for baseball, I said, well, I have a job, because they didn't like any of my ideas. So I said, well, I have a job, I'm fine. So we just were eating lunch, and I said, last week I was in a school, and I talked about my dad, and if I do that, I talk about his character, because I feel like that's something that this generation and future generations will be able to grab onto and really make use of in their own lives. And he said, great, you can do that for baseball. So given the fact that I'm an educator, I had published one book at that point, and textbook. I'm going to develop a program, and so I had to think about it. Well, how do you really teach character, and how can I use my dad's life to teach character lessons? And I came into baseball, and I realized that 9 was such an important number in baseball that I said, well, the values have got to be 9 values. And then I didn't, because it's a school-based program. I had to find values that were universal and really reflected my father, but also would help kids understand life and their own life and how to deal with things in their own lives. And so that's how I came up with the 9 values. And then I started a program with Major League Baseball. And then a few years into the program is when I approached Scholastic and I said, would you be interested in some kind of book based on these same 9 values, and where Jackie Robinson would be at the core. And to be perfectly honest with you, I had a different vision of what that book would be. I had it a very contemporary book, very driven by poetry and and fiction and children's writings. And they came to me after we were in the final editing of that book and said they'd just read my memoir, and they felt that I needed to write a different book, that it had to be based on my father's life and my life, and someone else, I could choose the other person. And that's really how Jackie's 9 came to be. So I was like, what? And I had to keep my same deadline, so I had to go into action. And instead of children's writings, it's all adult writings. So they were absolutely correct. Because the book I was going to write, it would have been so over with, in 2 years later, when those lyrics no longer, you didn't want to associate with the person, with the artist. So this turned out to be much more of a classic, and I think that's what they were trying to get at. It's just a classic, multiple voices that will demonstrate. I said my father taught me these values not by printing them on a wall and saying, studying these values, but really how he lived and how my parents lived. So I wanted kids to be able to make it as real for themselves, and by using examples from men and women who had something written about them and had overcome obstacles in their own lives, and using these values, it was just a great way to share my father's legacy, but also help kids understand how these values can be applied to their own lives.
One of the great stories in the book that you were at a camp and they had playtime, and all of a sudden the movie came on.
Rainy Day.
Yeah.
Rainy Day movies.
Yep. And talk about that. It's an amazing story.
we moved into Stamford, Connecticut in 1955, actually the end of 1954, and we integrated our neighborhood. And it was, even moving into this neighborhood had been a challenge because my parents, when they went looking for property, had come up with housing discrimination. So there's intervention from a prominent member in the community, and they finally find this great property. But it meant that we were integrating our neighborhood and our schools. My brothers and I were. So I went to a day camp in the community, and so I was the only black kid in the day camp. And on a rainy day, they all knew who my father was. He would drop me off at camp or whatever. It was just, part of the carpool. He also got tickets for the campers to go to a baseball game. Anyway, so on this rainy day, we come in, and there's no preparation for this, and I had never seen the Jackie Robinson story before, and I didn't know about the early years of my father in baseball. My parents really protected us from that. And we come in there, and the reel starts rolling, and they show that Jackie Robinson, and my own father's comes up on the screen, and I'm in this room, and I'm mortified, and of course, especially when I have to sort of see racism. It was my first time also having a visual of racism, and I have to see the name calling and the backlash for him entering baseball. And I was like, I didn't know what that meant to my world. I was like just told, turn my world upside down. So that was my first challenge, and I was so confused by it that I didn't go home and say, Mom, what was that about? Or Dad, tell me about this. I just sort of put it in the back of my mind and went home and didn't have them explain. So it really took years for me to understand. So that's why that 1973 moment, 72 game was so important, because that's sort of the beginning of my understanding of that period and what my father contributed to race relations and American history. And that whole process continued and continues today, because I'm always learning something new. And especially since I have to interpret it for children in my writing. So.
Martin Luther King, I've never met a lot of people who actually met him.
Yeah.
You did.
Yes.
What was he like?
He was a very southern boy kind of feel, very friendly and warm, very gracious, very happy to come to our house and meet all of us, and to have my parents raise the money for him. So it was a positive experience. We were totally excited by it. We had just seen him at the March on Washington, and to have a close-up, moment to actually meet him. I was 13 at the time, so normal 13-year-old reaction of sort of feeling like we had grown up around people that I guess you would consider celebrities, and we didn't make a big deal out of it, but we knew this man was special.
Sharon, there's one member of our Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame who has a connection to your dad, Ranch Rickey, and I believe your family. His name's John Yacob. I don't know if that name's familiar to you, but he would have been an associate back when your dad signed with his minor league contract, I believe, with the Dodgers in 46. And he is from Chautauqua County. He owned our baseball team here in the late 40s. He is turned out to be a very successful man. I was just curious if that name rang a bell with you at all.
It does not. Yeah. So it just means, remember, I'm not even born at that point. So.
Well, I think he would have still had an association with your dad up until your dad's passing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I don't know how extensive. But I was just curious.
Yeah, he never came to the house, and I don't remember. I may have met him, but I don't remember meeting him.
What did you and your mom think of Jonathan Ives' book?
Well, I thought it was great. Yeah, it was actually, I had more discussions with my brother about that book. Very well done.
It looked like that was at least Jonathan thought it was one of the first times that your mother had sort of opened up. Did she feel comfortable that he did a good job?
Yes, absolutely. And it was nice too, because since it was such a concentrated period, it was like the film. You can get the detail, and the detail in his book was so tremendous.
Well, you've been great. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.